Good morning, Mr. Sukhad. Today we are going to
Yes, sir. Good morning.
one of the poems written by Matthew Arnold, Dover Beach. This is a different sort of poem. Why? Because its tone is pessimistic. Actually, there are some reasons in the in the life of a man which makes man pessimistic rather than optimistic. Pessimism is a product of human failures, deep frustrations, anxieties. So let's see what the poem is all about. Two words are quite familiar with us, that is Dover Beach. I think you have been to the beach. I was in Maldives for 3 years. I used to feel the breeze on the beach. That's why whenever I go through this poem, I remember those days. The recollection of those days are quite interesting, and also it gives me a tone of pessimism and a tone of optimism as well. Because whenever a man looks at the ocean, the beach, pebbles on the beach, waves on the beach, and the ocean, man automatically broadens his mental horizons and he starts thinking bigger and bigger. So let's see what the poem is all about. Dover Beach is the most celebrated poem by Matthew Arnold. The poem is quite interesting to learn because it talks about faith, it talks about religion, it talks about science, it talks about eternity, it talks about industrialization, socialization, it talks about existentialism, absurdism, and much more. The poem can be interpreted differently at different times. But the poem principally brings out the notion of absurdism, existentialism in literature. It is a bit focused on the theme of alienation, on the theme of scientific discoveries. Dover Beach is the most celebrated poem by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold himself is an educator, he is a writer of the Victorian era. The poem expresses a crisis of faith with the speaker acknowledging the diminished standing of Christianity, with the speaker witnesses as being unable to withstand the rising tide of scientific discovery. Today's world is techno-friendly. We cannot get rid of technology. Technology has become oxygen for us. We rely on technology. We are totally dependent on technology. It may have its disastrous consequences in the future, from where there would be no escape from technology for human beings, because the technology is going to surpass the human minds. It may be the most powerful weapon which will be uncontrolled, unmonitored by the human minds in the future. Although the technology is a product of human mind, but the product will be disastrous, will create the disastrous consequences or effects in the future, which will be beyond human potentialities, capabilities, and human demarcations. So let's see various aspects and perspectives that one can peep into the poem. The poem is nothing but the reflection of the poet on certain aspects in the nature. Here we are very eager to understand what the poem talks about. We are eager to understand the plight and predicament of the poet and how it gets inculcated, ingrained into the text. So in this fashion, the poem basically talks about a crisis of faith, with the speaker acknowledging the diminished standards of Christianity, which the speaker experiences as being unable to withstand the rising tide of scientific discovery. Science is progressing, it's a good thing. But still it also gives lots of trouble to human mind. It may create some, or it may pose some problems to the human mind from which there would be no escape. New research and intellectual inquiry cast doubt on humankind's central and special role in the universe. There is a new research, there is the intellectual inquiry into the self, but still it's quite suspicious, it's quite doubtful on humankind's central role in the universe. What is the role of the humankind? Can it be proved through the research? Is there any utmost intellectual capability to understand the universe? All these questions remain unsolved for the human beings. The speaker in the poem senses the radical changes in the nature subconsciously. Here he expresses a very simple experience, being on the beach. He sees and hears in the sea. The speaker looks out upon Basically, the poem puts forth the poet's expressions of alienation, the expressions of doubt, melancholy. In this fashion, the poem is very often interpreted as a remarkably forward thinking precursor to 20th century crisis of faith like existentialism, absurdism. See, one thing to simplify this matter, I would like to say a few things. That life is absurd for those who have not yet understood life. The interpretation of life can be different to different people at different times, right? But no answer is perfect. Just we will have the interpretations. That's why it is said, I think Montague has rightly said, interpretations demand further interpretations. Interpretations need to be interpreted first. So that's why no interpretation is complete in itself. It demands further interpretations. That's why this may be an intellectual or a reasoning inquiry into the self. So it happens actually. Why? Because of the disastrous consequences of the scientific discoveries in the future. In a sense, the poem is an inquiry into what it means to be alive. It's an inquiry into the self. The speaker looks out upon a calm sea. There is a calm sea. The sea is never calm. But there are some occasions where we can see the sea is sleepy, a calm sea. And the poet and the speaker in this poem also observes the fullness of the tide and the moon reflecting on the water. The fullness of the tide and the moon gets reflected into water, on the water. Looking across the English Channel, the speaker sees the lights of the French coast fade away. At the same time, the cliffs of the English coast stand tall and bright, and the bay seems calm. All of a sudden, the speaker addresses someone else and implores this person to come and look at what the speaker is looking at and to enjoy the night's ecstatic air. The speaker in this poem, quite naturally, senses something which is not clear, not right, and the speaker goes on describing the spray where the water meets the moonlight land. The speaker instructs the other person to listen to the sound of the pebbles as the waves shift from back and forth, up the beach and down again. The speaker, in this fashion, notes this slow repeating action and identifies with eternal sadness in the poem. See, even I remember my days when I was in Maldives. I used to be on the beach Most of the times I become very isolated, alienated from the world. Most of the times my mind deepens into myself, into eternal sadness, pessimism, because I become a I used to become a very great thinker. I used to think of the universe. I used to think of the life, the individual, the society, the country, and all these things. And it's quite natural because whenever man is alone, he becomes a thinker. So in this poem, we can see all of a sudden the speaker thinks about the ancient Greek playwright, that is Sophocles, and imagines Sophocles hearing the same sadness in the Aegean Sea as the speaker hears now on the English coast. Sophocles, in the mind of speaker, likes the sad sound of the waves to the general sorrow of humanity, which moves like the waves. See, one thing which is very clear here, that humanity gets disturbed due to socio-political interference. Religion gets disturbed due to circumstances. But the concern is deep. The concern is humanistic. The concern is all about the human settlement, peace, tranquility, humanity, the most fruitful objects in the nature. The speaker in this poem also observes another thought which comes with the sound of the sea in this poem. The poet goes on explaining thoughts in this poem. Especially, he focuses his attention on a religious faith as a sea. And this religious faith is full like the tide, and it reached around the earth like a girdle. The speaker just hears the sea is retreating. The sea of faith becomes smaller and smaller as it gets disappeared into the atmosphere and leaves the edges of the world naked. The speaker in this poem addresses the companion as love and states desperately that the two of them need to treat each other with honesty and authenticity. This is because the world is having a dreamlike quality of variety. The world is dreaming. The world is having beauty and newness. Actually, the world never gives any joy, love, or clarity most of the times. The speaker in this poem provides peace, tranquility, certainty, and relaxation or we can say relief from pain. He also compares the collective situation for being on the beach to standing on a flat, dark piece of land, which is also caught up in the chaos of fighting. In this context, the battles between the unknowing groups go on, meeting or mingling with the eternal darkness. So let's understand the loss of faith and certainty, which is the main theme of the poem, and love. There is a big loss of faith and certainty. See one thing, in every generation, what we see, we believe in God, right? We believe in our religious aspects. We love our own religion because every religion is the best religion that talks about humanity. No religion tells you to do something wrong. All religions are the best. The human mind is the worst. So here in this context, there is a big loss of faith and certainty. The poem Dover Beach was written during the Victorian era, and it's quite important to understand certain features and characteristics of the Victorian period. Matthew Arnold's Dover Beach is nothing but a lamentation on the loss of religious faith, which comes in advance in various fields as the poem focuses its attention on the biology, geology, archaeology, evolution, and the textual analysis of the Bible, and much more. It talks about history. It senses the history. It senses a historical epoch and finds some radical changes which are being echoed in the transitional figure of the beach. The blurry border between land and the sea, he principally focuses on. The poem asks many questions. The poem asks the reader to reconsider what is lost in life, what is lost in humankind's movement, which is most of the times debatable. Humankind's movements are away from the certainties of the Christian faith. So such things are crucial for the speaker. The speaker in this poem brings out the fact that the loss of faith is equivalent to loss of certainty. Faith is essential, right? Faith is important. It's a belief. The Dover Beach seems to embody this loss both in its sights and sounds. The poem provides many clues in its interpretations, but these clues are not conspicuous, not so clear, because its main subject is the loss of faith. It begins by describing the atmosphere in which the speaker stands. The description of the sea, the sound of the pebbles on the beach are ecstatic, dazzling, beautiful at the sight. But they mask the eternal note of sadness. Anyone who looks at the dazzling beauty of the nature, anyone who looks at the flora and fauna of the mountains, everyone who experiences the ocean falls in love with the ocean. These things are quite crucial because nobody has a pessimistic outlook or perspective towards the universe. But in this poem, we feel that the poem demonstrates pessimism or a pessimistic tone. It talks about the eternal note of sadness, which is revealed at the end of stanza. This sudden intrusion of sadness gives hint to the poet because the speaker has almost lost his sense of loss, which finds fuller expressions in this poem. The poem has full of symbols, images. The symbol of the sea is connotative rather than denotative. It has two basic ideas. The first basic idea that one can understand is about the fabrication of society, the major shifts in the fabric of society, which occurs in the poem in its subtle manner. The beach is slow, and the repetitive movements on the beach is a symbolic manifestation of the gradual loss of faith, inevitable, unavoidable loss of faith that the speaker senses in this historical moment. See here how the nature gradually or unconsciously gives a pessimistic note to the readers. So in the second part of this poem, we come to realize the loss of religions, the loss of religious faith onto the movement of waves, which is being implied in this poem. These kinds of historical changes come in cycles, waves. The speaker imagines the ancient Greek playwright, whose name is Sophocles, hearing the same sadness in the sea the speaker hears now. The speaker sees an analogy between the irrelevance of the classical Greek gods in the speaker's time with the coming irrelevance of the Christian God in the near future. It doesn't mean that religious faith will return, but more that something will come along to take its place. That is the domination of science. The speaker's position on this loss of religious faith becomes clear if we go through the stanza number third. Faith once made the world, full and bright, as it offers ecstasy, comfort, joy in its certainty. Its loss demonstrates melancholy, and what is more, the sea of faith once touched the shores of the entire world. But it's now withdrawing. The poem is essentially talking about the fact that the loss of faith is global, is universal. It also suggests the tremendous reach of scientific advancements, the scientific progressions, the science and technology, how it is progressing day by day. The progress of the science may be a big problem to the human beings in future. But right now, people relies on comfort, tranquility, peace through science. But science is not the manifestation of the human ace. In loss, then, it represents melancholy. And what's more, the sea of faith once touched the shores of the entire world. The poem suggests the scientific advancements at that particular time. The speaker doubles down on the notion that the scientific advancements demonstrates a loss rather than a gain in the poem's final couplet, stating the fact that this new era will herald confused alarms of struggle and fight. So here the world is afraid of the future dangers. The world is afraid of wars, fights, human destructions, and the natural destruction of all the resources in the universe. The world fears about the okay. So here I was talking something about the advancement, scientific advancement. Okay. One thing which is quite clear, that there is a solution for all these problems. What is the solution? Solution is love. Okay. That's why it is also said that God has made this universe and human beings made the countries, the fights, wars, destructions, and everything. See, these scientific advancements may cause dangers in the future. The speaker in this poem brings forth the notion that the scientific advancement demonstrates a great loss rather than a gain. In the poem's final couplet, when the poet says that the new era will herald confused arms of struggle and fight. So this is what Matthew Arnold uses. Confused arms of struggle and fight. Here we struggle, and ignorant armies clashing by night. See, one thing, whenever I think of the human existence, I think of Newton. No, Darwin's theory. What Darwin says, here is the struggle for existence, and here will be the survival of the fittest. Right? So all these things are quite applicable in today's scenario. If we look at the today's socio-political, scientific advancement and everything, then we come to realize how he was right at that time. So the speaker believes that scientific advancement will bring only scientific, not spiritual certainty, and will lead to more doubt and questioning. See one thing, that here nobody is going to be spiritual. Everyone wants to be scientific. So the poet wants us to be spiritual as well. Whenever you are scientific, whenever you apply the scientific method of inquiry into the self, two things are quite distinctive: the scientific and spiritual. The person who is scientific is not spiritual. Can we say that? No. The person who is scientific is spiritual. Can we say it? Up to some extent. Maybe it's possible the person who is scientific can be spiritual. The person who is scientific is not spiritual, because the science is supposed to be the product of the mind. It's not the product of the spirit. Got my point? Science is the product of the mind. It's not the product of the spirit. Can we say like that? No. It may be the product of the spirit as well, because the emergence of science cannot be fathomed as it springs from the mind, rational thoughts. See, there is a perfect amalgamation or the functioning of the mind, buddhi, emotions, feelings, spirit in the human body, which is beyond interpretation. We separate things. That's why the mind is separate, right? Buddhi is separate part in the human body, right? The spirit is a separate thing, right? The soul is silent, okay? just listening to the war inside. We interpret like that. Is it the same thing which we interpret? Because when we detect the body, when we open the body, when we cut the body into pieces, we find nothing. We see only blood, right? What we see? Only blood. So that's why the poet talks about spirituality as well, on the other hand. He questions the readers. The poem also expresses a kind of resignation. The speaker in this poem admits the radical change that is in process. He talks about the inevitable rising and falling of waves and the challenges the reader to consider whether this loss of faith is progress or a wrong turn. Looking at the ocean makes you melancholic, makes you ecstatic sometimes, right? So waves are rising, the waves are falling down, and it looks quite magnetic, enticing, alluring, attractive, fascinating, dazzling to our human eyes, and we fall in love with the beauty of nature. But here the poet says one thing, that the loss of faith is a progress or it's a wrong turn. Superficially thinking, we think that it's a progress because we never see the another side of the problem. It's like a coin. The coin has two sides, the good side and bad side. We can see the things from a single perspective, then we think that something is much better. But we never think of the disastrous consequences that may happen, that may cause due to the human progression, the scientific advancement. All is created by the human mind. Man-made products may be more dangerous and disastrous than the universe. Right? The universe has its wrathful side, but still the universe has the solution for every problem. But the products which are being made by human beings will have no solution in the future. And what about that? What about the science, the progression of the science, which may be a big problem to the human mind, from which there is no escape at all to the human life. They may be in a problem. From there is no solution. Door Beach is a deeply pessimistic poem. Pessimistic means negation, negative thinking that creates negative thinking in the mind. So in this poem from the beginning, you have been listening to the negative thoughts, right? Rather than any optimism. Because we are talking about pessimism rather than optimism in this poem. That's why the poem Door Beach by Matthew Arnold is a pessimistic poem, because it interrogates the major human values of the day and also embodies the sense of grief that some felt at the prospect of the loss of religion. This questioning stands up in the 21st century, calling on its readers to examine whether their, whether their own lives are spiritually fulfilled or not. So let's focus our attention on nature and alienation in this poem, the thematic concern, what the poet says about the nature and alienation. The poem is quite bigger. I think the half part of the portion we will take up tomorrow. Okay, we will see tomorrow the rest of the portion. Uh, I think which is the point here, then we can mark it out. This point is loss of faith and certainty. This point is Zoha. Nature and alienation. I think we will go through this next portion of this poem tomorrow. Next part, I will finish it tomorrow. Okay, we stop here. Thank you very much for being with me or listening to me, Mr. Sukhat. Have a nice day.